The American Adoption Congress 13th International Conference, April 11th to the 14th, 1991, in Garden Grove, California. This is program number D151, tape 10A.
So, well, I'll read this off because I think it's easier if I read it. It'll make sentences instead of just hesitations. And then I thought that Rachel could, she's in public welfare, and so all the things that I'm talking about, she's experiencing in her work with public welfare, and it's not quite as ideal as some of us think or know. So let me see. Did I bring my purse? Yes, I did. Amazing.
Now, are you taping yours, Linda?
Are
you taping yours?
Well, I guess so. They attached me to something. Do I have to turn it on or just, I think he just said speak, didn't he?
I think it's voice activated, so it just works as soon as you start talking.
Okay. I'll get my glasses. Oh, it's one of these purses that's so too big, you know, and so you lose things in it.
You need a zipper on the bottom.
Okay. Are they coming?
No, I don't think so.
I've been in adoption for ages, it seems to me. I've known Joanne since the very beginning when everybody was spitting at me, weren't they?
Yes.
Yes.
You weren't too well.
They've stopped spitting, but they aren't smiling yet. Okay. At the first American Adoption Congress meeting in 1979, groups of adoptees came together to air their grievances and demand that their records of birth and adoption be opened to them. Birth mothers from concerned United Birth Parents made a strong case for their rights to reunion with the children they had surrendered for adoption. The third party in the triad, the adoptive parents, were few, and the social workers were noticeably absent. It was a beginning. Since then, speeches, pamphlets, and articles of human interest, plus media publicity engendered by Alma and others, have brought the issue of opening adoption records into the public domain. The right of adult persons, even adopted persons, to their known heritage is seen as reasonable and proper today.
I'm going to close the story.
Okay. Those who resist such changes are on the defensive. Conservative agencies fear innovation, and as we know, bureaucracy moves forward at a snail's pace. Nevertheless, I have no question that the work of the American Adoption Congress in its campaign for open records will bring results, that birth certificates and other identifying documents will soon be available for adopted adults and their parents, those by birth and those through adoption. In the last decade, the American Adoption Congress has reached out to include birth fathers, an increasing number of adopted parents, and many civic. Oh.
We come in?
Yes, of course, we're delighted.
Huh?
We're a majority of listeners.
Am I in the right place? What is this panel?
Yeah, sit down.
What is this panel? Am I in the right
This
place?
is the panel Through the Looking Glass.
Well, what is it?
Anyway, it's the last one on the number 10, I think.
Number 10?
Yeah.
It's number 10.
In the last decade, the American Adoption Congress has reached out to include birth fathers, an increasing number of adoptive parents, and many civic and social workers of note. We have also involved ourselves in novel methods of adoption. We are promoting open adoption as a humanitarian and sensible way of benefiting all members of the triad in today's world. As one looks back to adoption in the 1950s and 60s, we see certain order in the hands of agencies. Authority was given to them to examine, approve, or reject adoptive applicants, to place children in what they deemed appropriate homes. The social censorship of unmarried mothers without the options available today resulted in their turning to adoption as the only way. No matter how misguided some social workers may have been in their judgment, there was in those days order and accountability placed with the agencies under legal direction and supervision. The significant tenet of the agencies was that the welfare of the child came first. As the trauma of unmarried mothers dissolved and abortions became legal, fewer infants are now available for an increasing number of adopters. The clamor of couples for adoption has largely bypassed agencies. Direct adoptions through doctors, lawyers, ministers, and friends, through newspaper advertising and influential connections, dominate the field of adoption today. The needs of adoptive parents have replaced the primary welfare of the child. Money counts. Dollars buy small humans without regard to the character of the adopting parents, without regard to the appropriateness of each placement, and without concern for issues unique to adoption. Adoption is in disarray. I guess we all know that. Do we care? As an adoption organization, shouldn't we take a stand? Are there principles we might agree on? Where do we go from here once records are opened as a civil right to adoptees, birth parents, and adopters? I know that some adopted persons think that adoption is such an aberration of nature that it should be eliminated entirely. My sense is that adoption as a way of helping children in need is not without problems. It is just one of many alternatives and better choice in many cases. Open adoption, so recent in the history of child care, brings a humane element into the surrender of children. Birth mothers and fathers need not lose their offspring forever. They can go on with their lives with reassurance in having known the parents who will raise their children. Open adoption needs study and analysis and probably some modification for the best interests of the children. I think we may have gone overboard in condoning the enemy sometimes develop between the two sets of parents. For example, I personally feel the presence of the adopting parents in the delivery room is an invasion of privacy. My hearing aid. Okay. I personally feel that the presence of the adopted parents in the delivery room is an invasion of privacy at a very special time for the birth mother. The experience of giving birth should be hers alone or with her own people, rather than with takeover new parents, no matter how dramatic and satisfying to them. Am I right in this? If we consider the welfare of children to be our first priority, who do we believe can serve these children best? I believe the objectivity of professional judgment of agency social workers, plus the subjective intuitiveness of birth mothers, make a workable, sensible, and just arrangement. The agency's primary assessment of adopting couples from which birth mothers make a choice is a method used by many progressive agencies. I believe it works. Shouldn't the American Adoption Congress declare their endorsement of agency-sponsored open adoption and reject in principle independent adoptions, the gray market, the black market, and all other schemes? There may be other issues the American Adoption Congress should consider. What do we know? What have we learned about what works best in adoption? Now I'm going to name off several things, and then I want us to go back and discuss them. And I want you to disagree with me, if you will. We don't want to just all be too much on the same.
At the end.
Yes. Now here's the first. An adoptee should be told at an early age that he or she is adopted. Learning this fact from sources other than parents in childhood or later in adulthood is destructive of trust for many adopted persons and may discolor their whole lives. Such betrayal was recognized by agencies years ago and corrected in agency policies. Have we ever expressed our conviction on this? I think we've actually practiced it, haven't we? I don't think we almost don't have to. The only thing is what we tell children they've adopted, and then we leave it there. That's been the problem, isn't it?
Kind of like sex. Tell it once and that's it.
Yeah, tell it once and then forget sex forever. You think it's sex that holds us up? Well, anyway, I don't think that's such a difficult one because I think that is almost taken for granted now, except I do think that once said, parents forget that the children forget it. I mean, they don't take it in until later, and they don't even know what adoption means. But a lot of adopted parents, I think, feel that they've done their duty once they've said it. Okay, now this is the second. We know that We know that the earlier in life an adoptee moves into his adoptive home, the better he and his parents bond to each other and adapt themselves to the new situation. Older children with early memories retained often find it impossible to relate fully to the adopted family. Are we focusing on the best interests of children when we accept postponement of adoption in deference to other interests? Shouldn't we take a stand encouraging permanent adoptions rather than temporary care for abused or neglected children? Shouldn't we bring pressure to bear upon the courts and the agencies to move more swiftly in the direction of adoption? Can we impose limits upon irresolute parents who leave their children in endless foster care and in at-risk adoptive homes? What do you think about that? It seems to me when I was doing adoption in the 50s and 60s and 70s that I used to put a limit in which a decision had to be made. I would encourage mothers to keep their children if it was at all feasible, but there was a decision that had to be made before this child got beyond the adopted status, so to speak.
It seems like from what, and this is speaking as a real novice to this, but just listening and doing a lot of reading in the last couple of months about this field, it seems like that would be a good position to have if it was within the context of an open adoption process. I think that the arguments that were made today were that if it is legally binding and that is a closed case, then a lot of the problems that people talked about, the issue of secrecy, the issue of all these other issues that were raised today, would still crop up. So my personal opinion is I would agree with that if it was in the context
Of an open adoption.
An open adoption process.
It would be like a custodial parent with the other parent with visitation rights. The child at least knows where its primary home is.
Except there is a difference. California in 1983 passed a law, which started to be implemented in 1984, that began to make mandated progress reviews and mandated amount of time that parents have to heal themselves in order to have a child returned. And the reality of what in California we're dealing with is that our population is not the population they talked about this morning. Our 90 to 95% of our kids are through the court system, including infants who are physically and sexually abused. We are mandated by law to first consideration relatives. So then the issues that come up and the risks that we look at in placing these children with relatives and keeping kinship bonds are twofold. One, we are placing them, many of them, in homes where they have abused the parents of these kids themselves. The abuse has never been taken responsibility for. No treatment has occurred. These children are and have been at risk for re-abuse. Or they grow up in a dysfunctional system and become abusing or victimized dysfunctional adults themselves. When I first came to work for Orange County Adoptions, I'm a social worker in the local adoption agency.
Tell what your name is while you're
Oh, I'm sorry, it's Rachel Foreman. In 1976, kids were sitting 4, 5, 6 years. Now, children are moving through the system in 18 months to 2 years. They are freed from their parents if the parents do not follow the service plans. Yet, at the same time, that raises issues because there are some families that you cannot maintain kinship relationships with. I can think of a case in particular I just finished a few months ago because I spent 2.5 years working in the court system, and I handled abusive cases in adoptive family. This was not an adoptive family. It was a 17-year-old mother with a 1-year-old child. For 3 months, from 9 months to 12 months, this child had been sodomized. We won't go into the details. Physically abused to the point where there are permanent scars that will have to have plastic surgery. Medically neglected to the point where he almost died. At one point, the maternal grandparents had this child for about 10 days, made no child abuse report, did not involve the agency because the mother of this child had been a dependent of the court herself because of their abuse of her. The mother was able to get the child and return the child to the abusive situation. I fought and was able to keep that child out of the maternal grandparents' home and out of the mother's care for a period for almost 10 months. Then we got caught in a legal situation. But then you get into issues. Can you, in good conscience, place this kid? And what I heard is that the child has recently come back in the system from the mother. The child was still a dependent. What do? Those are the conflicts that in contemporary field of adoption, public agencies are facing.
Yeah.
In
Yeah,
the less
it's a really good point, because I was thinking the same thing too, because I deal a lot, in prior lives, I worked a lot with welfare recipients in a welfare situation. And a lot of, it seemed to me that there's a number of populations that we deal with, and the population you're describing is not a population that was talked about.
It always seems to me that if you, the more you do back and forth, as is, and the child's getting older, and it may not seem long, 9 months to us may not seem long, but to a child in abuse and so forth, that's a whole lifetime. And the importance of getting a decision made early, and I don't think social workers and especially judges, aren't very good opinion makers.
Oh, no, I faced all the time judges saying, let's settle this. I had a case that I was forced to settle where a kid was with grandparents. 10 months later, I get a subpoena. The case blew up, the child is back in the court. Now she's in a foster home, which is where she needed to be. Mm-hmm. And we now will be able to reunify with her mother, who finally, after 6 years, is in a drug program and trying to get her life together. But I had an attorney turn around and say, you were right from the very beginning, but the judge would not back me. It's either I settle and get something or get nothing. No court intervention.
Now, did you have somebody standing up for the child in this?
In California, every child must be represented by an attorney in dependency proceedings. Mm-hmm. We have some of the toughest reporting laws in the country in terms of mandated reporters, and we have, I gather now, one of the most streamlined tracks for kids to get them through the system. Some parents do make progress and need more time, and 12 months or 18 months is not enough. But then I know with all the drug babies who come into the system at birth, we are facing a population of children that we are trying to place, that because we do have a fast track system, we are placing them in an early age when we do not know what they're going to be like. If we place a child between 2 to 4, you can usually see the delays in gross motor development or speech and language, which are two of the most common areas, particularly in coke and crack babies. But then what we're looking at attention, deficit disorder, hyperactivity, and we have very seriously involved drug kids. We don't know what these kids are. We have no way to predict how risky they're going to be, and we're asking people to take them. And the longitudinal research is not there because the population is just getting now when they're getting into school. And then on the other point is we don't even know what services we're going to need. And then at the same time, we have parents who parents can't clean up in a year. That is very difficult. And yet they're under.
Now, do you have trouble getting parents for these children?
It's not easy. And I have one case now, my last court case, where we have in the state 3 provisions under the law where we do not have to offer family reunification services at all. That is if a parent has been convicted of killing a child. If we have what we call a sustained E count, meaning extreme cruelty, like the young child I just talked about, and where there's 2 mentally ill parents. And I have a case where there's 2 mentally ill parents. In 14 years, the father had 15 hospitalizations. The mother had something like 12 or 14 also. They're not going to get better. And I'm having to try and find I have found a family for a child with 2 schizophrenic parents. But what happens is if we don't walk into court, at the end, when the court says no more reunification, go for adoption, we have a maximum of 120 days before we walk into court to terminate parental rights. And what we're facing now are cases where judges are saying, if you don't have a family, I'm not terminating parental rights, I'm not ordering adoption. He will not even order legal guardianship if the caretakers want to. He orders the kid into long-term foster care. And then if we find a family, we got to go back into court to terminate rights. The parents don't get to continue trying to clean up their act. So we're facing many issues, but legally, within a legal closed system, it can be successful because there are some cases where it has to be. Because if you return the child and keep certain kinship what are we doing with these
And after a
children?
while, it doesn't work.
And I understand you though that you're saying that no contact even later.
Later,
with
much
agreement,
later point
because-
in time.
Okay, because I'm in post-adopt, and I'm putting people back with their schizophrenic birth
No,
parents.
I'm not saying that, but I'm talking about some of
Okay.
the abusive families, yes, later. But
Okay.
in this case, these schizophrenic parents have been so disruptive in the foster home
Mhm.
that there's no way we can ask an adoptive family to take an open adoption. Technically, no agency in California, public agency, can do an open adoption, but the reality is we're doing them all the time.
what I thought.
Because caretakers and relatives, when appropriate, are adopting children. I have a case now where I'm finalizing, I had the child in the dependency court system 2.5 years ago. I'm finalizing the adoptions as I move back into adoptions. They have her half-sibling, who they adopted when she was about 8. There were 2 other half-siblings that had gone to 2 other extended relatives. Birth maternal grandparents lived 4 doors down from them. They have now adopted this child who was a drug baby and did have delays and was regional center handles developmentally delayed children. Number 6 is on the way. Mom is in jail. If she stays in jail, the baby will be born clean. If she's out on the streets, the baby will come into care.
You hope she'll stay in jail.
The problem is that there are no other relatives within the family system to take this 6th child. And the family has said, try and get a family that will allow this child to know her birth roots. We can't guarantee that. But we cannot ask them, they have 2 birth kids. The other child, they adopted her half-sibling, have been physically and sexually abused. They have been in and out of counseling with her for 4 years. The 2.5-year-old now is also in counseling because of being a drug child. She's had some developmental delays and some other issues to deal with. How much can you ask a family to take? Yet it is essentially, on the books, it's not an open adoption, but in reality, it is. And they are scared that one day the birth mother will show up on the door
Yeah.
because the 11-year-old, they know, cannot handle seeing her birth mother because of her memories of what her mother allowed to have happen to her. And that's the open records and the search issues with the population we are dealing
Yeah.
with are different for the future. The children want to search for different reasons, and many of them are so angry at their birth parents. And the hardest job that I have is in working with, because I'm an applicant worker, an adoptive homesteading worker, somewhat of a maverick, and then I've always supported open records in all the years I've worked within the agency in open placements involving foster parents and placements, is getting adoptive families to realize these are the issues, these are the risks. You're going to have to deal with them. Adoption is a lifelong issue. We have in this state a commitment that whether it's good or bad, and sometimes if the families are not appropriate, if a caretaker wants a child, that's it. We basically have to have new abuse charges to pull the child out of the home. And most of the time that's okay, but there are a percentage of these foster families that are adopting for inappropriate reasons. Sometimes the motivation is that they cannot handle the grief that comes with separation and loss of moving a child. Only one partner wants to and the other partner supports. And in most of the foster home adoptions that ended up in the court system for abuse that I dealt with, the abusing parent was usually the one that had not been committed to the adoption in the first place. And they don't make an emotional commitment to permanent parenting, as I call it. And we are having a whole group of toddlers that I saw placed 13, 14, 12 years ago that are coming back into the agency for several reasons. One, what we're finding out is that this early abuse, even of kids 6 months and 7 months old, stay with the kids in terms of sensory memories and feelings. The kids don't forget, and it comes out in all these rageful kids. And the parents can't cope, and because the kids were so cute when they adopted them.
Yeah.
Because they never made the emotional commitment to permanent parenting. When the kids act out, they're returning the kids.
Well, adolescence is a time you'd like to put your own children back in a barrel somewhere.
And adoptive families it's very difficult to get them to accept the reality of what we're dealing. Our population is. Annette and Ruben are talking about a population that still exists, but it's not the population the public agencies are dealing with. So I think some of the demands for public agencies to do certain things are not as realistic
I wonder, though, if it wouldn't be a little different, that if you did allow them to continue having some type of contact with the formerly abusive parent, unless, of course, it's the child's protection that you're concerned about, that the rage will not come out at a later time quite as much, because then the lesson can be taught that this abusive parent has been ill, and they can see for themselves that this was not typical attitude, because we do know that the abusive parents come from abusive backgrounds. And if you just cut them off from the reality of the abuse immediately and place them into a home that thinks nothing but of abuse, but let them have contact so that the reality of what it is, and teaching them modes of coping with this, if you wouldn't then have less of an outbreak than when they reach, after they get through the latency stage into the adolescent stage.
I think you have to separate out physical and sexual abuse when you deal with that. Most of the molest and sexual abuse victims I dealt with who are, let's say, over the age of 5, one, they were siding with their mothers for not protecting them. Most of the perpetrators I saw were fathers. Most of them do not want to see them. And they don't, and we do not force the kids to do that. And we do have monitored visitation with abusive parents.
But you still have to deal with the core of them that understand that they're part of those parents to begin with. Because we have this even with those who have been abused in adoptive homes, where they've been adopted as infants, been in an abusive home, they still relate to that particular home even after a reunion with the birth family. So if you have constant or gradual association,
the problem
with the
is
others.
that with most of these kids, the trauma of because most of these kids have to testify in court in order to get even juvenile court dependency. And our juvenile court laws changed again in January of '89, where to get a molest conviction in juvenile court, it has to be as defined by the penal code. Notice the pun there. And what that does to a child in terms of having to testify, most of these children are not willing to have any contact with the perpetrator for a long time. They have to get, it takes 2 years just to get, sometimes to wind their way through this system, and then subsequent testimony in criminal trials. Abusive families, we have ongoing contact. Every service plan I ever wrote said visitation, monitored visitation for the protection of the child. And I don't think anyone would disagree with that. The problem is that many of these parents, if they don't get unmonitored visitation, won't visit, a lot of them. It's a much more complicated kettle of fish than what we're
Yeah,
than
absolutely.
other
And-
families. But on the other hand, on the voluntary side, public agencies have changed. Our agency now does have birth parent selection. We have arranged meetings between birth parents and adoptive parents. We have, in the last 5 years, facilitated exchange of pictures and letters between birth parents and adoptive families. But the population of voluntary relinquishments in the public agencies are very small, at least in this state, because we're the only ones that can handle the children that come through the court system. Children's Home Society in this county, if you want a child basically over the age of 1 year, they send their families to us. You know, we send our real infant families who want 0 to 6 months to the private agencies, because it's so slim a weight, because our population, the amount of children, there was something I read in the newspaper the other day that nationally they said there's something like 340,000 children in the foster care system. LA County has something like 80,000 children in out-of-home placement. Relatives, you know, the whole thing. And we are going more legal guardianship. The problem is with legal guardianship with these older kids, they know it's not totally permanent. And we have seen legal guardianships dissolved when kids reach adolescence. Again, it's education in terms of getting people to make a shift to permanent parenting commitment emotionally.
Well, now, isn't that up to you, up to judges, or I mean, that's you?
The judges can't measure that.
The judges
They
can't,
have
and they don't.
no tool to measure what the commitment is on the part of the parent.
The
So,
only criteria that they do is, has the parent been able to heal themselves to the point where they can provide a marginal level of care. If they can, the child is reunited with the parents. Now, more and more what we're having and what we are encouraging in our families, which we did not do in 1976 or 1977 or 1978 or 1979 when I was placing children, is we are maintaining contacts between adoptive families and extended birth family. And we have to trust after a point that the adoptive families will do it. I am real careful with the families I work with in providing education that these are the kids' needs: separation, loss, identity issues, and getting families and educating them and trying to place certain kids only with families that I know will follow through on this commitment. We don't know yet exactly how this is all going to play out because the law is we've only been doing this for about really 5 years. I think it's going to take another 5 years. But from what I've seen in the abuse end of it, in doing the court work, the cases coming in of foster parent placements and adoptive placements that we did when I first came to the agency 15 years ago, we will see a certain percentage of these foster care or relative placements back in the system. And there seems to be a bottom line guarantee of that.
Yeah.
And it's really sad.
In Texas, we've solved that a little bit because we've set aside the funds. We have respite care, residential psychiatric treatment, and all kinds of counseling for the family, just as long as the child has ever been under the custody of DHS.
Well, now, how do you break through this? Because we know
Because
that,
we got sued. That's how.
No, we had subsidies when I first started in 1976. There were subsidies called our AAC program. It's now called Adoption Assistance Program, AAP. And we provide money. Families can, as long as a child qualifies as a special needs child, and most of the kids we have do, even babies. Drug baby, you're special needs. And it's really sad. A year ago, this time last year, we had babies stacked up in hospitals because we did not have enough foster homes for our drug babies in Orange County. Nice, conservative, affluent Orange County. And all of us were working overtime in our detention facility. And the problem is that when we get the infant families coming to our agency, people don't want these risks. And what I'm finding is that it's not even the risk for many of these people. It's dealing with the background information. How do you explain if five parents abuse a kid sexually or physically to a child to help a child? And then the other issue that I see in contemporary adoption that we're facing is there's not enough trained therapists out there. We have some excellent resources here in Orange County, but they're still few and far between. One thing our agency did do, and that's 4 years ago, we started a program called EPIC, E-P-O-C-H, called Early Placement of Children. And it's based on a program that San Bernardino has and San Francisco has in Riverside County, where we will place a child in an adoptive home as soon as the child is declared a dependent. Before that, it's too risky because the courts are so capricious. We're losing drug baby cases now because the public defenders have become so aggressive. They're treating them like criminal cases, chain of evidence. So once a child is declared dependent, we are placing them in adoptive homes that are actually foster homes and finding families who are willing to go through the legal system, knowing that if the parent gets their act together, the kid could be returned.
Yeah, that's hard, I think.
But there are visits. They know that there's no confidentiality. They don't always have interaction with the adoptive, with the birth parents because of competition and other issues. But we are doing that and have been doing that for 4 years. We have been very lucky in that between 70 to 100 placements, we only have one at this point that we think we're going to lose. All our others have gone to completion. But it has created a better way to keep those families hooked in with extended birth relatives such as grandparents or notes and pictures and cards and letters through the agency. The agencies are not such the monsters I think that people think they are. We are working, but we are limited by the law as to what we can and cannot do, and our population is very different now than 15 years ago.
Well, that's what concerns me, is what you can and cannot do. And maybe there's too much attention to the parents, you know, the parents of these abused children. Why are the parents have this right to return? I mean, each case, of course, is utterly different from another one. You can't really generalize, but it seems to me if you really are concentrating on the welfare of this child, you get that child out of the home as soon as possible.
The move is on to keep families in home, and the front part of the system, when the child abuse calls are investigated, We are putting in the state of California more and more money up front. Our population in our detention facility has dropped because workers are not bringing kids in. We are trying to keep them in the families, providing counseling services up front. The problem becomes that at a certain point in time, it's voluntary. And even if you have a substantiated child abuse report, if the family gets referred to the voluntary unit and they say, no, I don't want your service, when the social worker comes out, there's no service provided. We can't force. It's only when the kid comes into the system.
Yeah.
It's a real dilemma, because the goal here in California, the goal of the legislature was to create laws, not to leave kids sitting in the system for 5, 6, 7 years, but at the same time to heal families and keep children together in families as much as possible, and only take a child out as a last resort. But once they're out, to try and provide services. And it's become a catch-22.
Yeah.
Where is the best place if one wanted to look at the differences between the population 15 years ago and the population today? Is there a place that you've seen that's laid that out, that says here's what the population is today and here's what it looks like versus 15 years ago?
I haven't seen it. All I can know is from my own caseload and my own experience of working. I mean,
I just wondered if you had come across an article or something.
You mean
that-
involuntary?
In-
Relationship?
Yeah, yeah.
I haven't, but I just know that, 80% of the babies we placed were voluntaries years ago, and we were placing 30 to 40 babies, let's say, a year or a little bit more, 15 years ago, which at that time for a public agency was a large amount. And maybe 40% of our older kids were coming through the court system, and I would say now these are rough, probably 90 to 95% of all of our kids in public agencies are coming through the court system. Now, I don't know if Texas is the
No,
same.
that's pretty much the same.
And I think nationwide, that's what we're seeing, because there's, with the drug babies, and we do have several AIDS babies. We have not placed those in adoptive homes, but we have in Orange County, we're very fortunate. We have a medical high-risk unit, and we have specialized foster homes for our medical high-risk kids. And we have several AIDS children in these homes. We have homes that take babies on apnea monitors, which most of your coke babies, many of your coke babies will be on apnea monitors because they're born 4 to 6 weeks premature.
Do you have enough foster parents and adoptive parents? Is that the real struggle to when you're ready to take these children out of?
There's never. Now we probably have enough, which a year ago we didn't.
Mm-hmm.
What problem we sometimes run into is when families want to get a kid quicker, they really want adoption, they go backdoor foster care. Foster care doesn't match a child to a family, and then they're faced with losing a family because the court says the kid has to go back. We have that happen with the family. So there's all kinds of, as you push foster care, and it's not black and white when you start getting into the population that the public agencies deal with. I think Annette and Ruben are right, though, that those bonds that are safe initially to preserve, you try and preserve and foster them because the kid needs that. A 4-year-old who knows that this person protected her needs to know that. Yet I am faced with a situation in this little baby with 2 schizophrenic parents that nobody in the paternal family wanted anything to do with this baby in placement because the father had been violent in their home, nieces and nephews, and they said we cannot and we don't want to visit the baby because we don't want to get attached. And so it's a much more complicated issue, and for me as a worker who believes in not creating more separation and loss, who believes in that, we have, as Sharon talked about, some real internal struggle.
Sure, sure. However, it can be renegotiated. I mean, it doesn't have to be set in
Not
concrete
not
at one
with
time.
us.
Yeah.
Right. You have,
I'm a birth mother who did a voluntary relinquishment, and I find it amazing, Pennsylvania and across the country, the courts are putting so much emphasis on the preservation of family, of the drug babies, of the abused children. The incident rate is climbing steadily, and they're putting so much emphasis at having these children return to the families. Yet if a birth mother from a middle-class family enters a program and has her rights terminated, the judge does not even take the time to say, did you receive counseling? Is this what you really want? Why do they not put the emphasis on family preservation on those who have a support system available to them to help them parent their children?
That's one of the paradoxes that was talked about this morning, and I think it goes along with some of the issues that were brought up that relate to adoption as I first knew it 15 years ago. The secrecy issues, the issues that, I don't think anybody in the, you may get into trouble for saying this, I'm not sure that many professionals in the field have the ability to go back and say, we made mistakes. That's not the best way to do it. We need to admit these because, and I've worked with some birth parents who've called in on post-adoption inquiries and say, we were not signing waivers, I want my confidentiality kept. But at the same time, hey, we should recognize these. All voluntaries, we try. We work with our voluntaries very differently now than we did years ago.
I had a judge who was more concerned that I knew who the adoptive family was than anything else. He thought that was detrimental.
I think that's the difference between viewing adoption through the court system, which what hits everybody in the eye is abuse, all the kids, versus your really adoption and all of that went with it. And so judges don't want to get, it's like, you're doing this, you're consciously doing this, so therefore you don't have rights. These people have problems. That is my guess and what I've
Their
encountered.
children are paying the price for their problems, yet they're giving those abusive parents rights and considerations they're not giving to those of us who
Absolutely.
are mentally healthy.
Well, in the hospital, I remember when I was a medical social worker to begin with, and I can remember in the hospitals, these children coming in with broken arms and so forth from abuse, and the nurses bringing them back to life and loving them, and almost dying when these children were returned to those abusive parents. I mean, it was asking for trouble.
We are trying to facilitate more and more, and we have, our agency has facilitated reunions where we can do that now, and we have waivers, which we couldn't do years ago.
How long ago was it?
Almost 8 years ago.
Okay, I was going to say, if it's a reputable agency today, they're going to,
Then
but they're going to have open
I-
adoption if
I-
they're a reputable agency
I do
today, and that
have
wouldn't
open
happen. Really?
And that's what upset the judge.
Yeah.
Who they are.
Really? The judge was the one that,
He
Yes.
didn't
Why
say that I
either
knew
side.
who they were.
that's
So
interesting.
we
That's-
have another issue in Pennsylvania right now. The grandparent law is about to be voted on to give, it was meant for divorcing families, so that if one spouse has sole custody of the children, the grandparents from the other side would be able to have court-ordered visitation. Nowhere in the legislation does it rule out birth grandparents. The word adoption is used to only protect the grandparents in case the custodial parent remarries and their new spouse adopts the children. They, in the role of birth parents, would still have court-ordered visitation. Nobody at the legislative level in Pennsylvania, and we're not opening our mouths, of course, but the minute this is passed, it means my mom and dad would be able to go to court and get court-ordered visitation of the granddaughter that I placed for adoption.
Huh.
No one has taken a look at the fact that this legislation is.
That's a
going
weird,
through.
yes.
And how do you feel about that?
I think it's wonderful.
Okay.
I think we can then go in and say, you have to open the records. If you're willing to give my parents visitation, you have to be willing to let my daughter know where she came from.
Yeah.
So it's going to help us in the long run. We're not the only state. Grandparent bills are pending almost every state in the country right now.
Well,
The question on that one is, should the birth parent, if your parents, for example, had abused you, should you have the right to say, no, I don't want you to have contact with my child?
Yes.
Good point.
Yes. But they're not looking at that either. They don't care about that. You've got a bunch of wealthy people who lost their grandchildren through divorce, who said, we want our rights to be grandparents, which I think it's wonderful that they're fighting to retain the relationship with their grandchildren. And there's going to be some people who slip through that shouldn't be put through. At the same time, it's going to make a strong statement in adoption and open records.
I'll be very honest. I had several cases where I fought in court to block placements of kids with their grandparents.
This is the end of side A. Please turn your tape over and continue on side B.
And also, I knew in one case, that the grandparents would block any attempt at reunification, and this was the kind of case where reunification was feasible. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Many grandparents take sides and take ownership of these children in a way that emotionally prevents these children from having relationships with their birth parents. And I think that's another issue that, in terms of looking at these kinship networks, as Ken said, he's right. It should be like marriage. But when you begin again to move into the population that public agencies are dealing with, you have other issues. And I've had cases where grandparents, they've cut the parents out. And then the kids start having to talk about loyalty conflicts. It's very difficult.
The records, you believe in open records, right? And so you believe that a child who's abused, removed, subsequently adopted, should still have the right to go back and get their records and do a search.
Yeah, they want to.
Or the birth parents.
Many of the children have memories, and many of them say, I don't ever want to see them again. I'm seeing kids coming back. I've been in the business so long, I have kids coming back who are now adults, married with their own children. They're like a grandmother sometimes. But who are going back now and searching because they feel they're able to deal with their parents about why they did what they did. And then at the same time, the young ones who don't have the memories of the parents, they have the memories of the abuse. I think about, my God, what these adoptive parents have to do, and the issue of how you explain that, and how are these children going to feel. Because not only is it issues of all the normal issues of abandonment and rejection, but it's like, my parents did this to me, then I really must be no good. Even they abused me. So it's a whole, it becomes a real, there's a part of me that wants to be real protective of these kids from some backgrounds, because that it's even going to make it more complicated in terms of their feelings and add fuel to the fire, so to speak, for feelings of abandonment and rejection. If a parent relinquished, like you did, voluntarily with reasons, I don't know what your case is, but let's say the old days, like 16 years old and so forth and so on, how they have enough, dealing with that and what that causes, yet alone, what could have been so bad that my parents had to beat me up when my father had sex with me, a year old?
Well, hopefully you teach them to cope and understand.
We do, but it's not.
But that's the ideal, I know.
Why haven't you burned out by now, dear?
I did. I took a break.
You did?
Yeah. I took a break.
Did
I
you go
left.
to insurance or something?
Actually, I had left the agency, went into private practice for a year with an agency. I worked as a private therapist. I dealt with post-adoption cases. And then I had my own practice for a couple of years that did not deal primarily with adoption. And then took a little vacation living overseas and just played for a while. Came back and went to the court work. And having done the court work and now going back and doing home studies, I'm much tougher on the families that I'm working with. And I have really worked with our agency to change our orientation. I have a couple of families over the last 6 months have called up and complained to my supervisor and wanted a new worker because I was so negative. And they felt, real gruff and tough.
Is this age that's done it to you, or experience?
This is experience. And that, I'm not listening to them, and I have my own agenda and about kinds of kids, and we've talked about this. And because I've been around so long and I'm back and forth, I've seen many of my own cases or cases that I know from when I first worked come back in the system, come back with post-adoption. I see the issues. I know the kids. We had a call from a part-time juvenile court referee. The wife is a master's in educational psych. They adopted kids from us 6 years ago. I was not at the agency, so I don't know how old the kids were. The daughter has done fine. The boy is in a state hospital up north. The Rage Therapy Clinic in Colorado turned him down. And they are feeling so frustrated because there's nothing they could do. We don't know what to do. How can we deal with it? The kid doesn't care. He doesn't want to care. It's like we have and he said there's nothing anybody could have told us to prepare us. So as I see what I've seen and been through, I'm taking it back into my home studies and saying, look guys, this is the reality. Adoption is, as everybody said, a lifelong issue. It doesn't end the day of finalization, it just starts. And adoptive parenting is different.
You have support groups for these people, I get it.
Some, but a lot of them won't go. I push, and I push, I push. A lot of them won't go. We don't
required the
have
first
enough.
time.
Well, how much can they help anyway? You know, I kept thinking of all the time that's put into a lot of therapy with people by the time they reach 30 or so. Is there any real success possible?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I get a terrible feeling that you're finished by 30.
No,
I started therapy
You don't
myself
think so?
when I was 32, and
I was 35.
I was in it for 5 years. I grew up in an alcoholic household, and that saved my life.
Oh, so you're all been saved.
Well, I think we're
Or
all
sort
saving
of.
ourselves. I don't know whether-
My husband started therapy at 50.
You think 50 it doesn't pay after 50 or something?
I think therapy is real, I think it's a real important part, and as you're saying, I think one of the problems is there's not enough. There's not
Yeah,
enough
but
resources.
probably you had a good therapy too. I mean, there's a lot of crazy.
but adoption is so specialized, because I had a case that if I hadn't been the worker, they would have gone in and not pulled out just all 3 kids were adopted. In fact, I had presented a child to this family years ago when I went back and reviewed the records. It was interesting. The children's attorney wanted to pull all the other 2 children out of the home too, and I put my foot down and said, no, we'll leave the 1 kid out, let me do my investigation. The abuse was clearly related to adoption issues, not other kinds of issues that contribute to abuse. And I said, if you pull these 2 kids out, they're going to be, one was 16 and a half, and the other one was 7. His adoption had just been finalized about a year. It had been a long court case. He'd been molested and adopted a little boy. So you pull these 2 kids out, they will be unplaceable.
Yeah.
And it's only because I was the worker with my experience, we replaced that kid in the adopted family. They're all in treatment and parenting resources here. And any other worker, all the kids would have been out of the home.
And no place to go.
And no place really to put them.
Yep.
You had a question?
Of course, every case is so different, you know. You can't generalize about anything in social work. You know, each one is individual.
Rachel, you said something several times there about children like being curious about the birth or the family, their original family, or not remembering the family but remembering the abuse. What about the case where what I'm hearing so much now is that a lot of children, or older teenagers, are now into adulthood, they're finding out later they've been molested and they don't remember it, they've blocked it. So that must be a whole issue to deal with too, where they maybe idealize these parents, but they've blocked out the abuse.
Yes and no, in that because for those children where there's been caretaker adoptions, and they're good caretaker adoptions, it works out well because the foster parents sometimes know the birth parents or have met them. They know the background. Our agency, when that last, Virgil was his name, the last one spoke, our agency does not hide anything from any adoptive family. They know everything, molest. Even, we don't always maybe give all the gory details, like what was put in what orifice, but they know everything.
You have to do that by law, don't you? No?
Yes, but there's interpretations of law.
Oh, okay.
Our agency, in that respect, I think, is excellent in the presentations that it gives, and pretty much what I've seen throughout a lot of California. But, so the kids may have the idolized, but there's the other information. I think what adoptive families need to realize that I work with is that these kids will block certain memories, and that it's going to be an up and down process of in and out of therapy, because you can only deal with certain things in latency. Then you go into adolescence. Then you may not deal with some things until your 30s. And that's part of the key. And a lot of the issues and that Linda has raised and that we deal with and what Ruben and Ned have raised is going to take a lot of time and effort on everybody's part to do education up front. And that's the biggest fight that most of us in the field who work, even in private agencies and public agencies, is getting the educational piece in a way that it makes it sink in, and having the funding to do that. Now, I know Ken says no money, but I must say our agency has not raised its fee in 15 years. It's only $500. And that's all the public agencies in the state. So, and most of the time we're waiving that because everybody's taking these special needs kids, because that's almost essentially what we have.
Well, should we go on? I think that's it's enlightened us a lot from the idealistic picture of these little children. Well, now let's see. I don't know that this needs to be discussed very much, but we know that siblings separated through adoption into different homes is disturbing and may result in lifelong bereavement. Should we not declare our convictions in the value of family unity for brothers and sisters remaining after the parents are gone? I know that in my placement, I've placed several children, you know, they were in different foster homes and bring them all together in one adoptive home. I think that certainly is, I certainly think that's an ideal. I can remember this one case, they were all in different foster homes, and the little 6-year-old, who was the oldest, had this tremendous sense of responsibility for the 2 younger siblings. It was really kind of pathetic how this child wanted to know where they were and if they were all right. And they were all placed in a family. I said the mother was so energetic she'd kill one child just from her energy, and therefore she should take all 3 at once, and they did agree, which they did. That, I guess we don't need to discuss that much. Isn't that something we all sort of agree with?
I agree with it, but it's not always possible. I know on voluntary relinquishments, often a birth mother will not go back to the agency she had gone to previously. If you're talking about individual, if you're talking about group sibling group, that's one thing. But individual adoptions, I had.
But you know, we used to separate twins.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, I can't imagine.
Anywhere, is it?
Yeah.
God hope.
I must say that we have a sibling group of 10 right now. We have number 11 on the way. They're all full siblings. You know, realistically, we have to. But
Well, you can't, yeah.
Combinations. There are, as our population comes from worse and worse backgrounds, we've had a couple of situations where we cannot place the siblings together. One, there is often emotional abuse between the siblings. I mean, really severe emotional abuse. I had a case where the relationship was always terrible, and what we found out is the older brother said that if the younger brother had never been born, they never would have been in the system.
It just can't work it.
And I've had 2 cases of sibling molest perpetrators, and so we've had to separate.
When you separate kids under that circumstance, we have a case, and what we've asked is that as the therapists for each of the children agree that the children be brought back together, and the 2 adoptive families have agreed to reunite the children for visits and so forth down the road.
Now, I want to bring up the business of institutional care. I thought that was interesting what he said today, you know, that it might not be so bad. I remember in the District of Columbia where I worked, once they decided against any institutional care, and suddenly they had about lots and lots of foster homes, and they took 15-year-olds out of an institution they'd been in all their lives and tried to put them into foster homes, and it was an absolute disaster. But, so let's talk about that. We know that the transfer of children from one foster home to another is in childhood destructive of faith and security. Would institutional living without constant change be less harmful? Years ago, we went all out to rid ourselves of institutional care of children and to substitute foster homes as a more normal setting for them. The homes for foundlings, for little wanderers, and the saint-named orphanages bring a Dickens-esque picture to mind, yet wonders whether the constant adjustment that children must make with each change of foster families is worth our dedication to this one method of care. Does a child from a benevolent institution move into an adoptive home with fewer misgivings than he would from a series of foster homes? Is an institution more easily supervised and controlled than the many foster homes for which it is substituted? Now, I believe that for a lot of these children, older children that have been in an institution for years, it was a great mistake to try to make them adjust to another place. And as he said today, you know, even the institution itself can be home, can represent home, and my feeling is that a lot of adolescent children would do better in an institution where they have, you know, baseball teams or, you know, things that go on where they can have lots of children work better together than as individuals in foster homes.
Well, you know how we go to extremes, Linda, over the times and social services, and And we went that route at one time, and then we decided that there's a home for every child. And
Yeah,
we went overboard the other way.
that's right.
And
We're
those were the
extremists.
children that weren't always had continuity in homes and got back into the system. So somewhere in between. there
Well,
must
it
a
has to be-
happy medium
Has
that
to
can
be,
tailored for
it
them.
always has to be an individual matter. I mean, that's
Especially with
with,
the crack babies, and you're talking about,
Yeah.
wasn't he this morning, that the babies that we don't even know what we're getting into at
No,
this
we
point.
don't, and that's what's scary. We only know now about through 0 through 5, we know the risk. When I went to a drug training a few months ago, and what we have found out, or I was told, is that PCP is carried through the mother for life. It stays in your tissues, and a mother can transmit to her baby even if she only took it one time 10 years before her pregnancy.
Neonatal nurses will tell you, we're taking care of babies now that are so irritable and going to be that way the rest of their lives that we can't imagine a home being able to deal
Yeah.
with these, or give it enough structure to
but
deal with
but
it.
these babies show up very early. Their distress shows up.
No, not
Well, some is
necessarily.
residual also.
A lot of it's residual, but a lot of the other risks, such as learning disabilities,
Yeah.
the speech and language will come along. I know one family where the boy is an adaptive PE. He's an A and B student, but his gross motor delay and damage is permanent. He can swim, but he's never going to be able to play football and that stuff. He has to be an adaptive PE all
Well,
his
some
life.
homes can handle, some
And
families can
handle
do
that.
Sure.
I think this little baby I told you about, the 12-month-old who'd been physically and sexually abused, after about a month in our detention facility, which is a residential treatment, he kind of felt safe. We had such an aggressive kid at 13 and 14 months old, hitting other kids, more than biting, aggressive. They were considering at 15 months putting him in a group home. Because can you imagine his feelings with that kind of abuse done to him? And that's what we're saying, it's gonna come out. And I think we really have to realize that there's a mixture of what we have to look at for our population of kids. That sometimes kinship is okay. The other reason that I, years ago, did not support legal guardianship and felt that adoption was really the plan and have changed is that a lot of these older children emotionally will not be able to commit to adoptive families in the way that adoptive families need. However, families that are willing to take legal guardianship, the children can commit to and stay in. They have their memories, they have their loyalties, yet they may not be willing to trust, they may be emotionally always somewhat distant, and not really give on the level that some adoptive families need to have a child give to them and be theirs. But legal guardianship solves that problem. And for some kids, legal guardianship, and our court is beginning to recognize that.
Well, how does that make a difference? Is
It's
it just-
not for those families who take legal guardianship, one, usually they have their own biological children in the home already, or they have other children that they have adopted.
That's a biggie. That's a biggie.
And they have their emotional goodies, as I call it, their warm fuzzies. These kids are just so afraid and are not ever really willing to trust that much. And legal guardianship provides protection for the child, a legal parent who can make decisions. The child knows he has a permanent place to stay, but he doesn't feel like he has to really integrate totally.
Well, you're talking
and
about
be.
children who come into the system a little later who do understand these differences.
Or who have been in the
Yeah.
system.
I've been in the system.
Or whose potential.
Well, now, the last thing that I want to talk about is something I feel very strongly about, because I think I'm more familiar than with all your the difficulty. Oh, I know one other thing, so the medical information. I always, in my placement, I always insisted that there was a father to this baby too, and so I always insisted on getting hold of him, and most of them I interviewed, but that was the one requirement of a mother coming to us, that she had to name the father, and then I would interview him or at least send out information. Because of the heritage was two sides, which for a long while nobody seemed to recognize. Anyway, the familial medical information is important and sometimes vital to treatment. We know that we gather sparse data from young birth mothers and fathers unversed in medical matters and in youthful good health themselves. Familial diseases usually show up in later years. Should not agencies keep in touch with both birth parents and adopters for the purpose of updating medical information? I think that's not done usually, but it seems to me it has validity. How is that your?
That's exactly why I come to these meetings, is to get the word out that we want to hear from all birth fathers and birth mothers. We want current information.
Yeah.
But see, that's, the part of the hassle with that is that an agency can't, by law, go back and contact some of the birth parents from early on stuff.
Well, now, we got
Hands are
to get
tied.
around
That's
that.
not
Do you want to know how to get
necessarily
around it?
True, because we had to do that in a case. We had to do that.
Sure, you can.
If
Your
you
law,
have grounds,
Yeah, we
right,
had-
you can do it, but you can't just without the grounds
No.
say, give me a current medical status
No.
on my birth
We're-
parents. I mean,
If
that.
they call in though, we
the-
take all information.
If they call in, but see, it's how to breach the closed
Yeah,
record, the
yeah.
promise we would not contact
Yep.
them again. How do you breach that later and say, knowing what we know now about familial disease, will you update your current health status? Then they can't do that.
we're told legally that if there's any new information in the file, that you can one time attempt to contact the other person to let them know there's new information in the file. You cannot harass them, but you can one time
What's new
let them
information?
know. Well, you just tell them there's new information in the file. And
And
yes,
that's in your state though.
That's not the way California.
That's
No,
not
it's
the way
not.
California
Isn't-
is?
Wouldn't
Okay.
new medical information be grounds? Isn't
I would
that
think
grounds?
so.
Well, that's what I'm
I
saying.
mean,
If
not
you
new
have-
medical information on that particular person, but just the understanding that some new piece of information
That's
comes
racial
about
about
that informs
California.
you.
I had a family that
We
just,
can do
that came to
psychological.
orientation the other night where they adopted a child 14 months after the adoption was finalized, and this was an infant. The child developed childhood rheumatoid arthritis. Now, if your child gets rheumatoid arthritis at that young, to me, there's a genetic component. They've gone back to the agency, and the agency was, you know, kid's now 14.
Don't disturb anything.
You know, the agency 12 years ago was not cooperative, and there's no funding available for them, subsidies, because the child was not considered a special needs child because there was a voluntary
I
relinquishment.
wonder what their liability is for not doing it.
Well, what's their liability if they do? See,
I
from
think
the
there's-
point
Well,
of-
these are areas
Just
that
as
we're
much
just getting
liability for
into
not.
now because the kids are old enough.
Well, but the point of view from an agency, I work for an agency, I'm also an adoptee, so it's wearing both hats. But from the point of view, okay, you sort of sit as a caseworker in an agency saying, well, listen, now which party would I like to be sued by?
Yeah, right. Who's responsible?
You know, I mean, it's really a catch-22, like Rachel was saying, because you say, well, I contact a birth parent as part of the adoptive child or grown child or whatever, adoptive parents in this case. And the birth parent's concerned.
But they were clients of yours at one time. And if you give them an opportunity to make their own decision as to whether or not they want the information, we've been told that we're more.
See, I agree with you, but I
Yeah,
think you're.
but we're
you're
told we're
stuck
more
in the
liable
state.
if you don't. I mean, what if this
It depends on
person
the state
really,
laws.
this person with the rheumatoid arthritis, that your liability is here, in the here and now,
Well, I'm
Not
doing
what
that now because
took place.
we got a maternal birth mother on a child that I placed with a family from another local agency 8 years ago. The grandmother calls up and tells us that the birth mother died. She's only 30-something, probably from alcoholism, but we don't know. There's an autopsy being done. I was going to go right to the family, but I went through the family's agency, and we are waiting for the results of the autopsy, and then we're going to give this information to the adopted parent. I know that the boy has been into the agency, he's just now beginning to deal with his adoption issues, which he didn't when I placed him, and I knew that, and I saw him a year after I placed him, and he still hadn't yet. He's 15 now. He's just dealt with the fact that he has 2 half-sibs in other adopted placements that we had no way of knowing where they were at the time he'd done independent.
What do you think about a reunion with a child who needs a bone marrow or something?
child that
And that information,
Absolutely, yeah.
then can a reunion be established on that basis?
Sure, you go back, you have
Structure.
medical information, you have a medical need, you can get that kind of thing through the court system.
You mean that'll be, the record will be open on that
The
account?
judge makes the decision then.
Yes, if we needed to go back and open a record. In this case, we've placed, I'm in Washington.
Oh, I see.
We've placed this child in a situation, we've told birth parents.
Yeah.
This is the child's medical condition. conversation, you need to keep in touch with us and we'll make sure they do. I mean, we're going to try and maintain the contact, which is not going to be easy because they're real flaky, but this child will, I mean, we're going to need a biological.
Well, I know that in Washington, a child I placed in adoption needed, the agency wouldn't make that contact. I was visiting them on basis of writing them about the book, in my book. And so as an ex-social, I told them, I remembered the parents because they were German students at Catholic University, and I told the adopters that that's where they were and they could probably find them, be able to trace them. But that's an issue that's
Ethics.
Ethics.
Too, you know, and sometimes you just
We are
have to
caught,
take your...
just like the rest of the field, we are caught. I know I have always been an advocate of certain things that has put me at odds with my agency as a social worker, with a personal conscience and what I consider a high degree of professional ethics. Yet you always walk a fine line as a worker that your own personal values don't enter into it. And at the same time, I have learned, because of the changes in the law, that I fight for what I believe, I fight for the best interest of the child, to protect the child, because that is my first obligation, contrary to what some of the lawyers may think. And then once the court makes its orders, I am obligated by my job to enforce the orders, whether I believe in them or not. And I do lose. We have some adoption practices that aren't changing. And yet I'm hopeful, because I see the difference in my agency after a 5-year absence from the agency, and let's say it was a 7-year absence from the adoptions division going back and handling old adoption cases in the interim, that agencies are making progress. We are. But now we are facing other quandaries we didn't face 15 years ago. And the issue, the crisis in this country with the abuse issues and what that carries over for adoptions are not going to be easily solved within the framework of what Ruben and Annette talk about, because that is a very appropriate framework for independent adoptions, or often what the private agencies can do who don't handle the population we do. With the population we do, there are times when those kinds of frameworks will not be applicable because it won't be in the best interest of the child. Maybe later down the road, but not for many years. And it's how to reconcile all that is what I see as the challenges and the issues within supporting a lot of these things that we are going to have to deal with in the next 10 years.
Well, I think, I mean, the medical problems in the next 10 years with all these drug babies. Now, the last thing which interests me particularly is the adoption of black children. Adopters reach out to adopt children of Asian, Hispanic, and Indian heritages, while our own black children remain in perpetual foster care due to the prohibitions imposed by zealous African American social workers. We know adoption is no panacea. Adoption has its problems. It is usually only the better choice among several alternatives for children in need. Isn't it best that our own black children find permanent homes, even white ones, than that they remain in limbo? The white families I know who have adopted black children are colorblind and love all their adoptees equally. Where do we stand on this issue? Shouldn't the American Adoptions Congress declare itself?
Heresy. Shame on you, Linda. How can you say such a thing? COAC certainly stands behind you on that. National.
Now, one of the interesting
Council
things that
on
I was looking
Children.
through some of my clippings in preparation for moving to Colorado, and in it I find in 1984 the Supreme Court stated,
I'll be right back.
stated that race could not be a basis for discriminating against black children in foster, in homes, in adoption. Now that's a funny thing, because in spite of that, we do discriminate.
Yeah, black children wait longer. So the question is probably, how long should a black child wait for, or any minority race?
And
Any minority.
Your black-white child also.
Absolutely, any minority.
Yeah.
Or minority mix, how long should that child wait for a quote, culturally relevant home.
Absolutely. And it's the only thing we discriminate against is the black.
No, not in
No.
Washington. Samoans go to Samoans, Hawaiians go
Of
to
course, you have your,
Minnesota, Native Americans.
yeah, depends on where you are in this country.
Hispanic.
Yeah,
Yeah, Hispanics go to
the
Hispanic.
Hispanics on the West Coast.
Yeah.
I
I mean, it
can-
doesn't.
From a post-adopt perspective, what I have run into are some real problems on that with the older ones. But it may be that those are just specialized treatments, but I think that what I have seen, that there are definitely some problems. But I deal with adult adoptees, and it may be that the preparation of the families wasn't adequate.
Well, of course, I came from Washington, D.C., so the black thing, I mean, these children growing up, and the black children are placed with almost always white mothers. It's one of these wonderful things where you have a cross, they're brighter because there's something about when you mix things together, they turn out better.
But see, I don't always hear that, though, from the adult adoptees.
I
Black
asked,
adult adoptees that have been raised in the white
Yeah.
homes.
well, I don't know. I don't know if we know enough about.
It's going to be, that's one of the things that the study that we're doing is going to cover. It's going to look at issues. It's dealing with the, I wanted to say too, I want to invite all of you, if you could, to come to Dr. Anu Sharma's presentation, who's going to be talking about the national study that we're doing on adoption dynamics, but one of the dynamics is cross-racial adoptions.
Yeah.
And looking at adolescents particularly that were adopted as infants, and that's the nature of the study.
I'm not saying that there won't be problems. There are always,
think, yeah.
but it's a matter of aren't you balancing one thing against another all the time in adoption? What's better and what's destructive or not? The children I've placed in white homes, they seem to be extremely liberal parents who really don't think. They think of in terms of humanity rather than. They aren't showing off, in other
Do
words.
they live in integrated and cosmopolitan
Yes, and
areas?
sometimes I know a family that moved into a racially mixed neighborhood for the sake of the children. And I feel that we know that black and white people are now going together, and around Harvard Square you see them arm in arm, and I mean it's changing. We're changing, but we haven't quite gone all the way when it comes to adoption.
We're seeing a lot of transracial adoption across ethnic adoption because as caretakers have what I call first dibs on kids, then more and more we're having Hispanic children adopted by Caucasian families, black children adopted by Caucasian
Yeah.
families. Not always families that are living in integrated neighborhoods or have integrated friends or so forth and so on, but only because the child's been in the home for X amount of time, the child's attached to the parent, the caretaker says they want to adopt, we try and educate them the long-term issues and they want. We have seen a tremendous increase in our Hispanic population, and we don't have the Hispanic families. I have several black single parents. I know the other home study workers also, and we're finding black single parents now are getting infants because we consider a black
Yeah.
single parent a better
Yeah.
choice than a two-parent white family for a black child.
Yeah.
So adoption has changed. We're seeing a lot of
No,
it.
I think it's changed. We've changed. Of course, the changes I've seen in my lifetime, I can't believe. You know, I can't believe. I was reading the other day the Out of Wedlock. Do you remember that book?
Yes.
It was the book when I first went into adoption.
Is that the one that says one of the options of the decision-making is suicide?
No, I don't think.
I remember a book like that.
Well, this is horrible because it talked about birth mothers didn't care, that they didn't care about their children. So the point is adoption had to be, but it's mostly psychological, in which it says, you know, somebody got pregnant because the sister had a baby, or all sorts of psychological reasons. And when I was first working in Florence Crittenden home, I can remember the psychiatrists and all these serious social workers, we're also serious, and talking about the psychology of this little 18-year-old girl why did she get pregnant? And I said, you know, maybe she fell in love. And I tell you, the horror on the faces of the psychiatrist and all the social workers were unbelievable. I mean, we've come a long way in understanding that it was tough. Because really, until they began to speak up, we didn't even understand that giving up a baby was tough. Well, anyway, I feel strongly that we've got, the whole world is changing and we're getting more open-minded. Now, there's one more thing. Let's see, what is it? Oh, one last thought. Adoption instead of abortion. Two such analogous words are less connected than most people think. President Bush finds adoption an uncomplicated solution for all women, pregnant and poor. He is promoting adoption in place of abortion throughout the government agencies with a variety of benefits, not for birth mothers, but for adopters. I hope you're not all Republicans. He is simplistic in his understanding. I believe that even as an adoption organization, we are pro-choice, that we understand the dilemma of pregnant women who never consider adoption at all, but see abortion as their only course. Should we make clear our stand on this very current issue, is bringing up these few areas for thought, consideration. I'm really asking, where do we go from here? That's the end of my little discourse. But I think we're very grateful to somebody who's in the field instead of out of the field like I am.
Linda, I remember one of the first things you said to me at one of the very first AAC meetings that we went to. We were invited as professionals only to sit and learn and listen. I remember that. We used to sit on the edge, and you said, we're here to learn and listen because the triad members are the ones who are important in AAC. And yet they keep asking us to come back all the time. And I think that one of the things that I know, having been in it since the 50s, such as you, is that I have to be very careful that I don't continue to listen to it in a professional mode like studies and research and things that I gravitate to as a professional, that I need to remember that adoptive parents and adoptees and birth parents don't like, as they should, do not like to be considered statistics, and that
Or cases.
Cases, right.
I mean, you
Thing
could.
that as an adoptee and a professional in the field, which is certainly interesting, the generalizations that are made drive me nuts.
You're right.
Well, it's general.
Not every adoptee
Sure.
feels
Everyone's
the
different.
same way.
Sure.
A lot of them, it seems to me, and just being a novice, it seems like a lot of the generalizations that are made are also made on the basis of there's not a lot of factual basis to, and I'm not saying statistics are the answer, but it's certainly in most other areas where you're dealing with human life kinds of situation, you like to have some kind of body of knowledge that you can at least say something about, and that's the thing that amazed me. I know this organization I work for, it took them 6 years to convince the National Institute of Mental Health, 6 years, and an investment of about $80,000 of the Institute's own money just to convince them to do a study on adoption. I mean, that was incredible to me that it took that long for that to happen.
I think one of the changes that's happened is that I think that adoption has become known to psychiatrists suddenly. You know, they're aware of it, and even in institutions, mental institutions, where there are a lot more adopted, maybe out of the population, there are more there. A lot of psychiatrists have taken a long time to recognize that there are a few more problems in this field than just the usual. So I think it's getting across, but it's slow.
We send out, our center sends out a newsletter to 1,100 mental health professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists,
Yeah,
and social workers.
yeah.
And we're real pleased. They won't come to seminars because they won't listen to master's level people, but they will read our newsletters, and we're really reaching out, and they're getting very knowledgeable.
I think one of the things is that most people, the reality of adoption that's been painted for so long that most people have out there is the baby, you take it home, the infertile couple has their dream come true, and everybody lives happily ever after. I don't think people, and I know I didn't until I was working in the field a number of years, really begin to understand what adoption is all about. That these are all the issues, that now we have all these issues. And that contemporary adoption is a very complex area of life that is a lifelong process that sometimes brings a lot of grief it's based on separation, loss, and grief, but to the adopted family can bring grief and crisis into their life that they did not have before. And that is not a bed of roses. And until people begin to really get an accurate picture of what adoption is all about, understand how adoptees feel, and at the same time, because I have many adoptive applicants now who are adoptees, have to understand that some adoptees are not going to want to search, and that that's okay too. And, you know, the only thing I question them is that, no, you don't have to search. I'm personally naturally curious, so it's hard for me to understand, but I accept that. But it's like, if you don't have a desire to search, but your child does, how are you gonna handle that so your child can
That's
still
why
feel
I
comfortable?
searched. I can't get anywhere, but that's why I searched. Because
Yeah.
my son said, "Who do I look like?" I said, "Me," but that wasn't good enough.
But that's one of the first things that's asked. Yeah.
He didn't have as much
I was-
emotional
I-
birthday
I-
on the line either to search, for you to search.
I have two nieces. I helped one of the nieces, who's now 36, to find her birth mother, and it's been a very happy arrangement. The other one doesn't want to, and I said, your mother deserves to know that it turned out all right. You know, not thinking of her, but just this woman who gave up this child. I mean, she deserves to know that you're fine and everything's.
That's the second.
I think, yeah, you've got to think of the birth mother, and I think the first niece I had that I helped find her birth mother, she was amazed. Of course, I wasn't. That the birth mother was so excited about it. The birth mother was so thrilled. Meant more to her, to the birth mother, than it did to my niece. My niece had done the searching, but it was. I don't know. I think the results of search are so worthwhile.
Even when they
That's why I
come out,
call it rounding out the adoption triangle.
Not all truth is good.
Let me have one of your cards,
right.
dear.
I've heard, though, I think we're seeing a big shift in the reasons why people are searching with the kids in the population we're seeing today. Not in the voluntary sector, but in the involuntary sector, even among the infants.
This is why we always train our adoptive parents or foster parents to watch what they say
Yeah,
to the child about what the birth parent has done. Yeah.
that's where open adoption can help. I mean, if you at least you've met her, you've talked with her about, you know, the circumstances and all. Well, I want thank you very much for coming. We've been a very exclusive group. If anybody
This concludes this session.